My name is Helen Parker. I'm 70 years old, and up until today, I thought I still had a place in the home I helped keep standing. But when I came back from my routine doctor's appointment this morning, the front door wouldn't open. My key didn't fit. At first, I thought I'd grabbed the wrong set, but then I saw the note taped to the door, and right next to it, 4 large garbage bags and a couple of my old suitcases, my sweaters, my photo albums, my knitting bag, everything I owned. It took me a second to realize what was happening. My name wasn't even on the note. It just said, "The twins need more space. We've made the garage livable for you." My daughter-in-law's name was scrawled at the bottom. No signature from my son, no call, no warning. Just a neat little eviction while I was out getting my blood pressure checked. I stood there for what felt like forever, looking at the house I'd called home for the last 4 years. I could still see the planter boxes I built with my husband before he passed. The curtains in the living room that I helped pick out with Jessica back when she still smiled at me. That house held so many pieces of me, and now I was staring at it from the sidewalk like a stranger. The windows looked different, like the eyes of someone who didn't want to be seen. It's strange how fast your world can shrink. 4 years ago when Richard died, I thought the hardest part was over. I'd just buried the love of my life, the man I'd been with since I was 21. But then my son Daniel said he wanted me to come live with them. He told me they had space, that they didn't want me to be alone. Jessica had nodded and smiled politely. I remember feeling relieved, loved even, like I still belonged somewhere. The first few months were fine. The kids were still young enough to want bedtime stories and pancakes. Jessica even asked for help with dinner once or twice. I tried to stay out of their way, be useful, not needy. I never wanted to be that kind of mother-in-law, the one who hovers. So I stayed in the background. I thought that was what they wanted. But now, staring at my life in trash bags, I wondered when exactly that background turned into an exit. What had I missed? When had the warmth turned cold? Why didn't I see this coming? I sat down on the porch step, careful not to tip the bag with my framed photos. My knees ached, and not just from the cold. There was something else. Something deep, like a bruise forming under skin you haven't touched yet. Part confusion, part shame, and a quiet, sharp voice inside me that kept whispering the same question over and over. What did I do to deserve this? It started with the armchair, the one Richard gave me for our 40th anniversary. Deep blue corduroy worn just right. I used to sit in it every morning with my coffee, watching the sun rise through the bay window. One day, it was in this family room. Next week, the garage. When I asked, Jessica smiled and said the twins needed more space for their dance mats. Then it was the kitchen. At first, she suggested we coordinate our cooking times, said it would make things easier, but soon the times stopped overlapping entirely. She would prep dinner in silence while I hovered nearby, clutching my measuring spoons like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. My slow cooker disappeared. My recipe binder ended up in a drawer marked "Donate." I told myself not to take it personally. They had a young family. It was their home. I was just there to help to support. But small things kept changing. My toothpaste was replaced with Daniel's brand. My cereal got pushed to the back of the pantry. One day, the guest bathroom door got a new lock. Nobody said why. Meals turned into routines I wasn't part of. I'd cook something special, leave it warming on the counter, only to find takeout boxes in the trash later. On Thanksgiving, I made my sweet potato casserole, the one Daniel always asked for as a kid. It stayed untouched on the stove while Jessica brought out her curated table spread, store-bought everything. When I offered it gently, she blinked like she'd forgotten it existed. There were fewer conversations. At dinner, Jessica would ask Daniel about work, the kids about school. I'd try to chime in, maybe share a memory or a story, but she'd change the subject. It was subtle but steady, like someone slowly adjusting the temperature in a room until you don't even realize you're shivering. Holiday plans were made without me. I found out about the Easter brunch from a neighbor who got invited. I watched them leave in their pastel clothes while I sat on the porch, still waiting for someone to say they'd changed the venue. No one did. Not even Daniel. I tried to talk myself down, told myself I was imagining things being too sensitive, but I could feel it in the air. That hush when I walked into the room. The silence that followed my questions. The forced smiles, the half-closed doors, the way the grandkids started calling me grandma, less and less. I wanted to believe I was still wanted, still needed, that this was just a rough patch, a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew. Kindness had turned into compliance. Inclusion had turned into tolerance. And slowly, without a single word spoken out loud, I was being uninvited from my own life. At first, I didn't notice the silence. It crept in slow like fog, rolling into a field you thought you knew. Margaret stopped calling as often. When I asked, Jessica said I'd been resting and wasn't up for long phone chats. I remember blinking at her confused, then nodding like maybe that was true. The mail was the next thing. I used to love sorting through it every morning, even if it was mostly catalogs and bills. One day, the mailbox key wasn't on its hook. Jessica said she'd been bringing it in to help. But I never saw half of what used to come: no birthday cards, no newsletters from church, nothing from the book club I'd belonged to for over a decade. One Saturday, I called Margaret back myself. She sounded surprised to hear my voice, said she'd left messages, tried to stop by, but was always told I was too tired or not feeling well. The way she said it made my stomach turn, like she believed I'd pushed her away, like I'd wanted to disappear. Even the kids changed. Emma used to curl up next to me with her chapter books asking for help with big words. Ethan would show me his Lego towers. Now they barely made eye contact. Whenever I asked if they wanted to bake or play a game, Jessica would appear and say something like, "Grandma's resting," or "Let's give her some quiet time." Every suggestion I made was intercepted, redirected, erased. I felt like a painting on a wall, there but not seen, present but not acknowledged. I'd walk through the house and hear them laughing in the other room. Conversations that paused when I entered and never picked back up. I stopped offering ideas, stopped asking questions. Eventually, I stopped trying at all. Then came the basement. It was supposed to be temporary. Jessica said they were reorganizing the upstairs and needed space for the twins to study. She said the basement had been fixed up cozy even, and that I'd have more privacy down there. I didn't fight it. I told myself it was just a new chapter, a short one. But the basement was cold. Damp in a way you can't fix with a space heater. There was a cot against one wall and a box labeled Helen's Things in Sharpie. The carpet was frayed. The window was so small I had to crouch to see daylight. I lay awake that first night listening to footsteps above me. I wondered if they could hear me down there. If I cried, would anyone come check? Would anyone even care? The scariest part wasn't being alone. I realized I'd become used to it, that somewhere along the way I had accepted the shadows. I'd gone from mother to guest to ghost. And nobody seemed to notice the difference. It was in the basement, staring up at the water stain on the ceiling, that I remembered Richard's voice. Faint, but clear. He'd grabbed my hand in the hospital just days before the end and said if things ever felt wrong, really wrong, I needed to call Thomas. At the time, I thought he was just scared. Or maybe confused. I nodded, kissed his forehead, and never gave it a second thought. Until now. I sat up, legs heavy with stiffness, and something harder to name. I pulled out my old phone, scrolled through the contacts until I found his name. Thomas Reed. I didn't expect him to answer. It had been years, but he picked up after 2 rings like he'd been waiting. I didn't even know what to say. I just told him what happened. The locks, the note, the basement. The silence on the other end of the line wasn't hesitation. It was a calculation. He asked if I could come to his office. Said there were things we needed to discuss about Richard's estate. His tone was firm, serious. It made my spine straighten. He sent a car. Black, sleek, far too polished for someone like me. But I rode in it without looking back at the house. At that moment, I didn't feel like a ghost anymore. I felt like someone coming in from the cold, finally ready to ask questions. Thomas greeted me like no time had passed, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet urgency. He walked me into a long, wood-paneled room, pulled out a thick file, and placed it in front of me. He called it the Parker Family Trust. I'd never heard of it. But my name was on the cover. Richard had set it up 15 years ago. According to the documents, the house I'd been locked out of wasn't Daniel's. It wasn't Jessica's. It was owned by the trust, and I held what Thomas called lifetime residence rights. As long as I was alive, no one could remove me. Not legally, not even with a note taped to the door. I sat there stunned. Thomas kept going. He said Richard had suspected this might happen, that Jessica wasn't who she pretended to be, that her warmth was practiced and her kindness conditional. Richard had seen through it. He just hadn't wanted to say anything unless it became necessary. Apparently, he had planned for everything. The documents were airtight. Jessica couldn't sell the house. She couldn't transfer ownership. She couldn't even make structural changes without my signature. And here she was, calling realtors behind my back, scheduling evaluations, preparing to cash in on something she didn't own. That's when the rage hit. Not just anger at her, at myself. For being quiet. For shrinking. For thinking I needed to earn a place in a home that had already been mine. Richard hadn't left me helpless. He'd left me protected. I just hadn't known. Thomas closed the folder, looked me in the eye and asked what I wanted to do next. And for the first time in a long time, I had an answer. I wanted to go home. I didn't ring the doorbell. I still had a key to the side entrance through the mudroom. Jessica must have forgotten that one. The house was quiet, except for her voice coming from the living room. She was on the phone speaking low, but clearly excited, listing features of the house and asking someone named Brian if they could push the listing before the end of the month. I stood just outside the doorway and waited. When she mentioned square footage and said something about the old lady moving out, soon I stepped into view. She turned, and for the first time in years, she looked truly afraid. Her hand trembled as she ended the call. She asked where I'd been, said they were worried. I told her I'd been talking to someone who knew the truth about this house. She tried to smile, tried to spin, but I didn't give her space. I walked right into the kitchen and dialed Thomas. My voice was calm. I told him I was ready. Jessica asked who I was calling. I said the man who could explain why she was about to lose everything she thought she'd taken from me. Her face dropped. I could see her trying to calculate. Backpedal, deflect. I didn't let her. When Thomas arrived 20 minutes later, he carried a leather folder and a steady confidence that filled the room. Jessica stayed standing too nervous to sit. I led him to the dining table, the one I hadn't been invited to in over a year. I sat at the head. He laid out the trust documents, explained the terms, outlined my rights. Jessica said it had to be a mistake. Daniel said he inherited everything. Thomas didn't flinch. He pointed to the clause that stated exactly the opposite. Jessica's voice cracked. She said she didn't know, that no one had told her, but her face told the truth. She knew something wasn't hers and had planned to take it anyway. She hadn't just changed the locks. She'd staged a quiet takeover. Right then, Daniel walked in. His work bag was slung over one shoulder. He looked from me to Jessica to Thomas. He asked what was going on. Jessica opened her mouth to answer, but I spoke first. I told him the house was mine, not in theory, in legal fact. That his father had protected me, that his wife had tried to erase me. Jessica tried to interrupt, saying I was exaggerating. I looked at Daniel and asked him one question. Had he ever seen the space she made for me in the basement? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I saw it in his eyes, the flicker of shame, the slow realization. He asked Jessica what she'd been doing. She had no answer. just excuses that fell apart before they left her lips. Thomas stood and said there was more to discuss. But first, I had a decision to make. I looked at Jessica, at the woman who'd smiled while shrinking my world, who'd turned my son into a bystander. And for the first time in years, I smiled back, a real smile, the kind that says you've just taken your life back. After Thomas finished speaking, the room went silent. Jessica sat slumped in the chair across from me, her shoulders no longer squared, her voice quiet. Daniel looked, torn eyes darting between us, like he was still trying to wake up from the truth. I cleared my throat and told them what I'd decided. I wasn't going to press charges. I wasn't going to fight over money. But I wasn't going to live in a house with someone who had spent years treating me like a burden. If Daniel wanted to stay and rebuild what was left, he could. But Jessica had to leave. She broke down. Tears, apologies, the whole script. She said she didn't mean to hurt me, that it all just got out of control. I didn't respond with cruelty. I told her I believed she was sorry, but that sorry didn't undo the damage. I told her trust is a line, and once it's crossed, it doesn't always come back. Daniel didn't argue, he didn't beg. He just nodded slowly, like the truth was finally louder than the fear of facing it. He said he wanted to fix things, and that he knew the first step was letting go of what caused the harm. As Jessica gathered her things, I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I stood by the door and thanked her quietly for helping me see clearly. Then I shut it behind her. I didn't hate her. I didn't wish her pain. But I wasn't going to forget. Forgiveness for me meant no longer carrying the weight of her actions, but it also meant drawing a line she couldn't cross again. That's how cycles break. Not with revenge, with clarity. The house looks different now. The walls are painted a soft yellow, the kind that catches morning light just right. The sterile whites and grays Jessica once loved are gone, replaced with colors that remind me of the life Richard and I built, not the one someone else tried to erase. My chair is back in the living room, right where it belongs, near the window that faces the garden. I sit there most mornings with a mug of tea and the crossword puzzle. Sometimes Emma joins me, curled up with her sketchbook, asking questions about flowers or recipes or the way Grandpa used to whistle when he cooked. Daniel still lives here. He offered to move out after everything happened, but I told him no. We needed time. Time to rebuild trust. Time to grieve properly. He's not the same man who looked away for too long. He listens more now. He checks in without hovering. And one evening, over spaghetti and garlic bread, he looked me in the eye and said he was sorry. Truly sorry. I believed him. Ethan helps me in the yard on Saturdays. He's gotten good with a shovel, always eager to plant something, even if he forgets to water it later. Emma loves the kitchen. She asked if we could make that sweet potato casserole again, the one that used to sit untouched. This time she licked the spoon. Margaret came back into my life like she'd never left. Our weekly coffee dates are sacred. We laugh, we talk, we shake our heads at everything we've survived. The isolation is gone. So is the shame. In its place, there's a calm I haven't felt in years. The house isn't just a roof anymore. It's mine, not in a legal sense, though it is that too. It's mine in the way a space becomes yours, when you fill it with joy, memory, and choice. No one decides where I sit, what I cook, or when I rest. I wake up when I please. I eat what I crave. I live on my terms. Sometimes I catch myself humming. Just little tunes. But they surprise me. Because for a long time I didn't think I had music left in me. Turns out I just needed silence to end before I could hear myself again. Jessica hasn't called, and I haven't gone looking. Some people are chapters. Others are lessons. She was both. The trust Richard left didn't just protect my rights. It gave me the key to my own strength. It reminded me that dignity isn't something you ask for. It's something you reclaim. I'm not just the old woman in the house anymore. I'm the woman who found her way back to herself. who stood in a storm and chose not to disappear, who looked in the mirror and saw someone she still liked. And that, more than anything, is the kind of home I was always meant to have.